everyone. I'm Leah Grimm-Thomas. I'm a part of NSSA. And I am just going to kind of kick us off here and introduce our moderator, and we'll get going with this wonderful panel. So just a reminder, some of our goals for the State Solutions Breakout, they're kind of twofold here. The first one is that we raise awareness of how states can support high-impact tutoring. Pretty obvious. The second one is give practical examples of how states support their high-impact tutoring programs. And third, we would really like you to lead with new ideas for how your state can support high-impact tutoring. Now I will introduce our wonderful moderator. So John Scianimanico is an associate partner at NewSchools Venture Fund, where he leads a portfolio designed to enhance math education through investments in generative AI. Prior to NewSchools, John spearheaded K-12 education initiatives out of the Connecticut State Department of Education and Governor's Office, including the Connecticut High Dosage Tutoring Program. His prior professional experiences also include roles with Teach for America, Arnold Ventures, and the 2020 Peat for America presidential campaign. John graduated from American University with a BA in political science and from the Harvard Kennedy School with an MPP. He currently lives in New York City. Welcome, John.
Cool. Thanks, Leah. And good afternoon, everyone. Really, it's a pleasure to be here. As Leah mentioned, I work at NewSchools Venture Fund, but prior to this, up until 2 months ago, I was in an SEA, as many of you probably are, in state government for about 4.5 years. So this work is really near and dear to my heart. In fact, my colleagues at the CSDE, that high dosage tutoring was my love language, because I love it so much. Others were just as passionate about it as I am. I'll also start by saying that I just have so much empathy for the folks up here today on this panel who are once again navigating quote unquote unprecedented times, right? A phrase that I thought I would retire after the pandemic receded, and yet here we are again facing another round of uncertainty and unpredictability. But I do want to acknowledge, as someone who has worked in an SEA, just how essential state education leadership is to high dosage tutoring, right? If we think about the feds as being the funders and the districts as being the doers in this, states like the ones that are represented here today play an important but sometimes overlooked role in making high dosage tutoring functionable. They are the policy designers, they are the implementation strategists, they are the legislative advocates to their governor's offices and to their education committee members. They are the research and evaluation advisors. They are the quality control managers. They are the district thought partners, and they are responsible for all of that, unlocking sustainable funding, thinking about workforce development, and most importantly, ensuring equitable access to our students, right? And so, at a time when federal education leadership is diminishing, the necessity of individuals in state government who are passionate about high dosage tutoring, who are keenly aware of its potential, and to have the willpower to advocate for it and fight for it, I think is absolutely paramount. So I am humbled and I am excited to be here with 4 states, Texas, New Mexico, Florida, and Ohio, who are all leading the nation in implementing high dosage tutoring for students, ensuring that it's not just a one-time education fad that comes and goes, but something that is sustained, that is scaled, and that is cemented in the fabric of schools in a post-COVID era. You'll hear today how they're supporting HDT, some of the wins that they've been able to notch, some of the struggles that I think they've endured over the last few years, and what the future of it looks like in their states. And by the end, I hope that together we can not just surface some technical solutions to making it work, but collectively sourcing some political willpower and cross-state network and connections as well that we know is important for this work. So with that in mind, let's turn to our panel to kick things off. I'd love for you all to just briefly introduce yourselves, say your name, your role, the state that you're from, and then one accomplishment that you are most proud of in your work leading HDT. And I'm also going to have some fun facts and data in the background that I will come back to as we go through questions. So Shaunté, let's start with you in Florida.
Awesome. Hello, everyone, and thank you for being with us. My name is Dr. Shaunté Duggins. I'm the Director of State Initiatives at the University of Florida Lassiter Center for Learning. Go Gators. Yeah. And something just to kind of set some context, we were established during the last legislative session. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But the thing that I'm most proud of is that we've been in a space of learning for about a year. And so we've been able to network and learn from a lot of our national leaders, many of you here in this room, and really take lessons learned from other states in terms of what best practices are, things that we should plan for, things that we should avoid. And so one of which is being able to be intentional about setting up a system for data and being able to look at impact across the board.
Awesome. Thanks, Shaunté. Let's move over to Ohio.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tricia Couts-Everett. I am from Ohio, and I'm the Learning Acceleration Administrator for the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce. And prior to that, I was a curriculum director for 7 years. And I just started with the department in June of last year. So this has been fast and furious work. And I say that just to mention that the majority of my work this year has been informing stakeholders across the state what is high dosage tutoring, what is high impact tutoring. And so I think my proudest moment so far is the response from stakeholders at a time where it's not funded, it's legislated in Ohio, it's not funded. And they're digging in, stakeholders are asking great questions. They want to know that they're in compliance, but then they also want to know, are we doing this correctly, according to research? So the response, frustration, but hanging in there, and it's exciting.
Awesome. Thank you, Tricia. Christina, do you want to go next?
Yes. My name is Christina Weeks. I am from the state of New Mexico Public Education Department, and I oversee our high impact tutoring state funded program and also our state funded out of school time program. And, you know, we have had an explosion of tutoring initiatives in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And so I'm excited to talk more about those in a little bit. And we're in an exciting time now that kind of the easy money, so to speak, is dropping off. And it's time to, he said, it's time to fight for what we know is working. And I'll have to say that my proudest accomplishment is all the work that we've done in the past year, traveling the state and actually talking to the districts and the school site leaders and the program directors to learn about how tutoring is working for them, to understand what's really going on the ground, so that as a state, we can really design what we do moving forward in a way that's responsive and that will work and have buy-in.
Great, thank you. And last but not least, Texas.
Can y'all hear me okay? I'm Colby Self, Director of Texas Tutoring Supports at the Texas Education Agency in Austin, Texas. Glad to be here. I've been at the Texas Education Agency from the beginning of the tutoring push with House Bill 4545 4 years ago. I was able to come to the conference at Brown University when it kicked off and been able to come back. So it's been exciting times. Probably what I'm most proud of is to be able to see the evolution of tutoring in the state from the beginning. Similar to what I've heard here and here elsewhere, we were getting calls and questions at the beginning like, what is it? What is tutoring? To now we're getting what I would say are advanced level questions like how does tutoring fit in with MTSS integration and strategic staffing and other, you know, high level questions that we're having to wrestle with and think about as opposed to what I would say are entry level implementation questions. So that's good to hear. People are thinking about systems and integration and coherence, which here one just makes me think like we've come a long way. Not that there are people at different stages, but just that we're thinking about it more as instead of a single function, but more how does it fit in with the scope of the work we're doing. Part of this, I spent 20 years in a district like John. Most recently, I was a elementary principal for 9 years. So glad to be here. Thank you.
Of course, thank you. And Colby, I'd actually like to start with you, if that's okay. And you use the word evolution, evolve, right? I'd love to dig into that because I think Texas was an early adopter of HGT, and you can figure out how to unlock something like HGT in Texas. You can figure it out almost everywhere, given the scale and size, right? So can you talk more about just how your tutoring journey has evolved, the challenges you face, both, I know there's been some political challenges in Texas, some staffing challenges, and what supports TEA, the Texas Education Agency, is offering today?
Thanks, Sean. As I mentioned, I started in June of 21. The legislature had passed House Bill 4545. That's what it's known as. It's still referenced as that, even though we've had some subsequent legislation. But that tied required tutoring hours for students that failed to perform satisfactorily on the state assessment, which is STAR. Starts in 3rd grade. All subjects were required to receive 30 hours. We paired that with a grant funding for high impact tutoring, where we had around 300 districts throughout the state join in that promoted high impact tutoring for all grade levels. So following the guidelines the NSSA had put out for dosage ratio and whatnot, and promoted that. At the same time, we leveraged all of our educational service centers, all 20 of them statewide, to be a resource for both supporting the legislative side of House Bill 4545 implementation, but also training for high impact tutoring for anybody that wanted it. And we contracted with a company to develop we called it an agnostic tutoring training, not branded, but how to be a great tutor, the best practices to develop the relationship, implement quality tutoring sessions. And it was available for anybody. You could go twice, you could go 3 times. It didn't cost you anything. A lot of it was also done virtual because we're on the tail end of COVID, and that still was the practices. But that was a really successful model. The high impact tutoring grant did serve to provide funding, was sourced for people to contract and get tutoring. Most of them used it to provide virtual in-person tutoring because staffing was a concern. And we thought that's going to be the big concern. We're going to need all these tutors. It wasn't as big an issue as we thought because most of our school systems wanted to keep their tutors in-house. They wanted to use their staff. Something about that still plays into effect is that relational aspect, that trust and that comfort that our staff are working with our students. The problem is you have to balance that with the burnout of your staff and the demands of your staff. And so it didn't come out that was as big an issue as we thought. There still are staffing issues, don't get me wrong. There still are problems in staffing, fulfilling tutors, but for the most part, they were staffing it internally, or with the funding, they were able to have the stopgap measure with virtual tutors for a period of time with ESSER funds that were available. So we were able to mobilize and get a lot of tutoring resources out pretty quickly. There were some initial problems with 4545 that had some inflexibilities with the bill. And then 2 years later, legislative session, we were able to take that feedback and come out with House Bill 1416 that further aligned the statute with high impact tutoring and gave some flexibilities. Part of that, there's also placement with a highly qualified teacher through our teacher incentive allotment program. So in lieu of tutoring for the hours, you can ensure that the student's placed with a designated teacher, master teacher, and the teacher would have to go through have to be designated through a program where they have to meet specific criteria. So those options gave us a a more refined process, but also gave some flexibilities because there was always exceptions that we had not considered. There's always going to be exceptions from a state level you don't consider that come up that you need to address and need to look at. You know, the pushback with the implementation was, and we don't have staff, we don't have time. Have you looked at your schedule? There's always scheduling. Typically came down to a beliefs issue. We've had band here for 20 years. My grandparents had band at this time. You know, football's got to be at this time. But looking at it from an outside looking in, there seemed to always be some type of mechanism. We discussed yesterday that there are districts in our state using AI to better address it. It's a non-biased look at what can we really do with our schedule? How does it work with strategic staffing and scheduling to make it work, to make it fit when we don't have the money for additional staff and time is an issue with that. So how much time do we have, John?
We'd say you have another minute or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just looking forward with the work we're doing, we're looking at pushing tutoring in to other areas and making it more of a cohesive process. So it's not this standalone thing that we're doing in addition to everything else. We are saying it is this acceleration of student learning. So it's not this remediation, but keeping that acceleration. But how can we make tutoring part of our educator prep program in regards to the hours for these apprenticeship programs and the pre-apprenticeship programs? So when I went through, I had to go get hours at the YMCA or community hours. I would have been better served tutoring a small group of students on a particular curriculum, management skills aligned with goals or guidelines for that program that would prepare me for teaching. So that's our goal with a pilot we're kicking off in the fall to align and develop a toolkit that can be used statewide. Also pushing on outcomes-based contracting and leading a cohort with a district, with several districts, getting that kicked off through our ESC tutoring hub we're kicking off as well. So that's the future we're looking at, the integration and trying to stitch that together from a practitioner standpoint. So it's not looked at one more thing. It's the thing that we do as part of everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I see you have over 1 million students participating. That's twice the number of students we have in the entire state of Connecticut. So just the implementation challenges, I'm sure we could spend a whole panel on with Texas, but I do want to move on to Florida and hear from Shaunté, who has a different model. The state of Florida has a different model to operating high impact tutoring, and that it is implemented at the university, right? And so we'd love to learn more about that. Maybe the pros and cons of operating out of a university versus outside of an SCA or outside of government. So can you talk about that, Shaunté? Can you talk about how you're using this first year to plan and to prepare and to pilot for implementation, and maybe some of the stumbling blocks that Florida has encountered with funding?
Yep. So we are in a very unique position at the University of Florida. We've been around for over 23 years. The Lassiter Center for Learning, we are a unit within the College of Education. And so because we've been around for so long, historically, we've provided professional learning in early learning, literacy, and mathematics across the entire state of Florida and really beyond. And so we have worked very closely with the Florida Department of Education for years. For example, we worked to create a pathway to reading endorsement with the state that was created and piloted and launched statewide. And so for those reasons, districts and teachers have very good relationships with the Lassiter Center. The state has a really good relationship with the Lassiter Center. We are trusted. We're seen as a resource to the state, which really positions us well to serve as the administrator for the Florida Tutoring Advantage. Prior to the legislation that created the Florida Tutoring Advantage, we were tasked to administer another statewide program delivering free books and resources to students who are not yet meeting grade level expectations in reading. And we stood that up very quickly and really well, and managed lots of resources, including millions of dollars that the state shared with us. And so when the opportunity came around for the state to leverage high impact tutoring statewide, they called on us to administer the program, which we are very grateful to be partners in that space. And so because of our relationships with districts, and also because the legislation did not mandate that students be served under specific criteria, we were very reliant on working with districts and developing those relationships and really leveraging the relationships that we've already had with districts to say, hey, we know that you all need this. We know that we are a resource to you all. Let us work with you in this new capacity to support students. And we didn't have to beg much because the districts were, trustworthy. They knew that we could come in and support. And so the thing that is probably a little bit of a challenge is that it's, the funding is not guaranteed. And so we, when the legislation passed during the last session, we had 30 million in the House budget and in the Senate budget. The governor did a pretty wide sweep to cut about $1 billion in the budget, and our 30 million was vetoed as a result of that. And so we had some funds that remained that the state provided to us to pilot. And so, like I mentioned before, we were really fortunate to adopt a plan, prepare, and pilot a kind of mindset because we weren't, scaling statewide. We used that time to learn, to leverage best practices. We worked deeply with NSSA, Accelerate, OBC, and others to really learn from others in terms of what's worked, best practices, things that we should avoid, lean into. And so we've been able to do that on a small scale with a pilot right now. We have been fortunate to also create some guidance for the work that we're doing now. And so that's been really beneficial. We really ran with the impact model. And so we're trying to, again, position ourselves as a service to the state of Florida. I didn't start my timer. I had it up here. So you have to now tell me when, otherwise I can talk all day about this. But we use the impact as a framework to help us to think about how we would provide services to our districts. And so we're implementing best practices and guidelines. And so we're creating a host of resources, many of which we've developed with NSSA, Results for America, and others, just to really think about what is the landscape of tutoring nationally, and then how do we bring that to our very, very unique Florida context. And so those resources are available to districts. We're also creating and mobilizing with professional learning. And so we're creating courses to support our tutors, to support districts, administrators, if they're wanting to implement high impact tutoring, so they know what those best standards and guidelines are. We're also partnering with districts in a number of ways. And so we're providing funding for districts for them to implement their own high impact tutoring should they choose, and also our guidelines, but also partnering with a number of vendor partners that we vetted. Lots of you are in this space with us today as well. And so this is, again, both in reading and mathematics. We are also analyzing and using data. We're at a Research One university. I am a research scientist. And so this is a part that really, everything is exciting to me, but it's really exciting that we get to leverage data as a part of the legislation. We're also partnered with the Department of Education, and they give us data for all students across the entire state 30 days after the progress monitoring window closes for kids in the state of Florida, and that happens 3 times a year. And so we have a ton of data in addition to the data that we receive from districts and our vendor partners. And so it really positions us well to study what we're doing, to look at impact and also opportunities that we have to improve what we're doing. And then we're collaborating, I've mentioned, with our vendor partners in both reading and mathematics, face-to-face, virtual, automated. And then the last component is transforming with AI-enhanced supports. So that's not quite high-impact tutoring as we define it, but we're working with Conmigo to provide licenses for up to 150,000 students in 6th through 12th grade because they're already in partnerships with teachers in the state of Florida. So we're leveraging that as a resource to support teachers and make things a little bit easier for them.
So what's striking about what you're saying, Shaunté, is a lot of the work that you're describing you're doing is typically work that an SEA does. And so for a program, I'm curious, for a program for HTT specifically, how big is your team out of the University of Florida? Is it just here today?
No, we have a small but mighty team. So I mentioned that the work really cuts across the entire Lassinger Center. And so we have a really robust center. We have over 200 associates. But as far as the team that's working on the day-to-day, my colleague Jenny is here. So shout out to Jenny, who's leading the day-to-day work of, for the project and with the team. But we have a small group of like five team members. But again, we're leveraging the resources across the entire center. And so like we don't have our own comms team, but we do have an entire comms department that we get to work closely with. We work closely with the literacy team that I was previously a part of. We work closely with our mathematics team, the folks that are creating the content on the LMS. And so there's a whole team for that. We have another data team. And so we have lots of colleagues across the entire Lassinger Center that supports the Florida Tutoring Advantage.
Yeah, small team, but
yes,
Herculean effort.
That's right.
Tricia, I want to turn to you. Your background is in curriculum, so I think this question is right for you, which is around instructional coherence, right? And this has been a theme that we've heard before in high dosage tutoring. It came up on our morning panel this morning. The last thing we want is for what students are learning in the classroom to be completely different from what they're receiving in their tutoring session, right? That doesn't make sense. So, but in addition to talking about the coherence of content, I was also wondering if you could talk about the quality of the content and how you think about introducing high quality instructional materials, both in your tier 1 instruction, but also in the tutoring sessions that students are receiving.
Certainly. Ohio has been on a journey probably for the last 6 to 7 years. So I want to go back a little bit, so bear with me to provide good context. As I mentioned, I was a curriculum director and we started receiving supports and information from our regional support teams on the science of reading. So districts had started transitioning. Some districts had started transitioning to the science of reading, other districts did not. Well, then we'll fast forward to 2023, 2024 school year when in legislation, it is required that all staff have science of reading training and high quality instructional materials in K-5 must be aligned to the science of reading from an approved list by the department. And intervention materials, K through 12, must come from an approved list as provided by the department. And I was sitting in a meeting in a room like this with 27 other district leaders, curriculum directors, assistant superintendents, when the approved list came out. And I got to watch their reaction across the room of whose programs were on the list and whose weren't. Okay. In that same legislation, high dosage tutoring was included. And you can imagine that high dosage tutoring was not at the top of the list of priorities for district leadership at that time. I was sitting there as a curriculum director, had never heard of high dosage tutoring, didn't know what it was. And we all started talking about how could we make something we're already doing check the box for high dosage tutoring. So I'm sure we are all, this is resonating with many of us in this room. Fast forward to June of last year, and I took my job with the Department of Education as the Learning Acceleration Administrator, and suddenly had to get very familiar with this thing called high dosage tutoring, high impact tutoring was. And it's just been quite a journey. I had the luxury of several months of just focusing on high impact tutoring and really becoming knowledgeable about it. But with all those pieces of legislation, there was a clash of the titans. Because we know that for high dosage tutoring, instructional materials must be aligned to just-in-time supports aligned to grade level instruction. But we have this approved intervention list that is a program and must meet certain rubric criteria, and high dosage tutoring does not meet that rubric criteria. So I heard Susanna this morning reference high dosage tutoring as an intervention. If in Ohio we say it's an intervention, it would not meet the intervention requirements list. So we have some tension points. In addition, in Ohio, we've really had a remedial approach to intervention and not had really the term acceleration be used regarding accelerating learning by front loading, getting ahead of what, closing those gaps that are happening with grade level content. So my role has been working inside the department on terms such as intervention. How do we define intervention? How do we define remediation? How do we define acceleration? How does this fit within an MTSS framework? And how do we answer the question from our stakeholders, what instructional materials are we required to use for high dosage tutoring? And so you can see I've hyperlinked these resources so that you can see how we've responded to these tension points coming in from districts and schools who, by the way, want to do this correctly, but for all of the reasons we're highlighting it during this conference, it is a struggle. So the first bullet point will be that legislation, take you to our high dosage tutoring legislation so you can see what that language is. And then the supports. So we have implementation best practice supports in our 3rd grade reading guarantee manual. We have an FAQ that responds to specific questions that were coming into the tutoring inbox, etc. We do provide per legislation an approved vendor directory. Districts are not required to use vendors from that list, but it is a way for them to know what we've reviewed and has landed on our list. And then we have a Tutor Ohio Kids support that provides tutors to districts that need access to tutors. And that is also a piece of legislation. So I've put those hyperlinks there for you. I think what's interesting as I was putting this slide together that I want to point out is the 4th row in the larger graph where it says number of students. We have required per legislation K through 5, anyone who's not on track or proficient in reading. And that's 240,000 students approximately, K through 5. And then that continues on and adds a new grade level every year until the student meets proficiency, which is passing the state test. We had funding for the past 2 years to provide some vendor tutoring to schools and districts. We were able to provide that to 12,000 students. Yes, 12,000 students. So we've learned a lot from those different areas. In terms of other ways we've provided supports, and when I say we, I mean me, because I am the only person taking care of tutoring in the department. So when I am supporting, we have something called a Read Ohio Policy Hour monthly. And it is an opportunity for the policy team at the department to share updates on the legislation, and then for people to enter into the chat questions that they have. And it's highly attended, always a minimum of 200, sometimes up to 500 district and regional stakeholders across the state. They're so receptive to it. It's been a great opportunity for me to teach what is high impact tutoring. Then the tutoring inbox is flooded with, you think you've explained it very well and are very clear, but there are always so many follow-up questions. And then that informs the development of the FAQ. It informs the upcoming content for Read Ohio Policy Hour. It prompted highlighting all of these tension points that I mentioned earlier. I just want to check my notes here, make sure I have not forgotten anything. The purpose of all of this work that Ohio has been focused on is to honor compliance questions from stakeholders and to elevate and elaborate the information with research. One of the things that keeps me up at night is that a district or school would not understand what this is, spend all of this effort implementing something incorrectly, and then look at us and say, you put this in legislation and it's another thing that doesn't work, right? So that's what drives me. And then next steps, we're developing a state framework for multi-tiered systems of support. Finally, we're doing multi-tiered systems of support. We have districts and schools that are doing a great job, but we have not really aligned our guidance at the state level. And so it's a great opportunity to answer all of these questions for districts and schools. So I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you, Tricia. I want to finish here with Christina, at least in terms of my questions. I was at the NSA conference last year. I know your Secretary of Education was one of the keynote speakers, Arsenio Romero, and he talked about quite candidly the cancellation of the statewide contract and the impact that had with the opt-in model due to the lack of uptake. And I respected him tremendously for being so open about recognizing what the work and pivoting for the sake of our students. As we've heard from everyone else here, implementation, fidelity to model really matters. So Christina, could you share more about what the New Mexico Department of Education is doing with tutoring and how it's ensuring things like quality assurance, adherence to dosage, and other factors that make this program successful are being implemented?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, we really have had kind of an explosion of tutoring initiatives. And this has been in response to, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. And so as you see up on the slide, we have a HIT middle math program. We have our HIT literacy program. We have our summer reading program. We have state-funded high dosage tutoring and then near peer tutoring. And as you mentioned, there have been other initiatives that didn't necessarily make it. And so we've had this wonderful opportunity to really see the differences between different models and have a chance to kind of get an idea of what's working, what maybe isn't working as well, and what do we want to do more of? Why are the things working that are working? So we and you can see that this is coming from a variety of different funding sources. So we have we've had our ESSER funding, we've had some GEAR funding, so this is all federal, and then we also have our special project is our HIT Middle Math, which is our tutoring program that is designed out of our relationship and partnership with University of Chicago. We're doing part of their nationwide research study. So what we've been able to do there is design a tutoring program for math for our middle school students that is specifically tailored to the needs of New Mexico. And what that means is in New Mexico, we have a lot of rural and small school areas. In fact, it mostly is that across the state. And so what's unique about our part of the partnership with the University of Chicago in this research study is that we're working on a virtual tutoring model. So what we did in New Mexico is we found tutors and hired them, but they're not necessarily located in the communities where the students are being tutored. So the students will get on their computer screens, and the only thing that the school really needed to do is just identify a staff member to be in the room with them while they're working with their virtual tutors. And we wanted to see, with this research study, they're wanting to see how well this is going to work. And what's amazing is that we found incredible gains with this model. One of the interesting things to note is, a lot of people are asking, well, how does in-person tutoring differ from virtual tutoring? And I think that maybe that's not the right question. I think that maybe the right question is, well, what is the effect on tutoring when you have a tutor and teacher communication line as opposed to maybe being more separate. Because specifically in our model with the HIT Middle Math is that we've ensured that these tutors, wherever they're located, have a good connection with the teacher that's connecting with that student. So we have a shared Google folder, a shared Google document, and every single day that teacher is putting information about what that that student is learning in the classroom, and then that tutor is putting information about what they're tutoring, and they're having that communication, and that's showing. I think that maybe is more so a factor than whether or not that tutor is in person or virtual. Now, I think that we can all agree that in-person is always ideal. Another reason why in-person is ideal is because, especially in these small and rural communities, you really want the community members to be connected culturally with these students, because we know the importance of that relationship. But you know, in New Mexico, we really have to think outside the box a little bit, because it's not as easy to hire tutors all the time. So that's one thing that we've really been able to see. Another exciting thing is that you'll notice we do have some funding from state. So we've been able to get that awareness and that excitement at our legislator level. And you know, right now we're in a time where it's really, I think all of us are in the same boat right now, is it being kind of a test of time where we're at, because you know, we were moving away from money that was kind of, you know, thrown at us, and we're like, okay, well, obviously we're going to do tutoring with this. This is going to be something that's really helpful for our students. But now that you know, the ESSER money is going away, we really are at a point where we need to truly advocate for what we know works for our students, and we need to design these programs well for our students. Tell me what else I can speak on. We can talk about coherence. We have in New Mexico, we have our agency-wide strategic plan, and we have 5 big goals. Number 1, literacy. Number 2, math. Number 3, attendance. Number 4, graduation. And number 5, shared accountability. So in New Mexico, big goal 1, and then each goal has a set of strategies. Big goal 1 and strategic strategy number 1 is high impact tutoring. So right now where we're sitting in New Mexico is we have about $30 million in our House bill that can be used for tutoring. So we're going to figure out how that's going to be organized. We're basically in the process right now to find out how those initiatives, how that's going to be spread out between the initiatives. And most likely what that will look like is there'll be a combination between state-funded high dosage tutoring, where that funding gets directly to our school districts, and they are able to run those programs. And we also have a summer reading program that's one of our governor initiatives. So we really are excited about that. And I think overall, coherence is important, but buy-in is also important. So we're kind of finding a good balance between allowing those districts to run their own programs, to create their own programs, because there's where you get your buy-in. There's where you get your buy-in, because they're creating those. And then when you have buy-in, it almost doesn't matter as much, you know, where the funding comes from, because if you have a district that is doing something that works that they created, they're going to figure out how to fund it. And we know that. But at the same time, we want to make sure that there's coherence across the state. So what we're prepared to do is we're going to be organizing technical assistance sessions for all of the districts that participate. We're going to be providing technical assistance. We're going to be talking about our guidelines and expectations, but also allowing for enough flexibility that it's possible to run programming. Because when you start putting too many restrictions on what high impact tutoring needs to be, sometimes it's like, oh, well, we can't participate because we can't do that. We can't participate because right now, we have no way to figure out how to reorganize our schedule to do tutoring during the day, okay? I would personally rather see tutoring happening than making sure that it must be happening during the day, right? We know that that's best practice, but maybe it's better that we get started somewhere and then figure out how to make adjustments.
Yes, it's always an interesting question of what you take from the research and how do you apply it in your own
Yes.
context. I remember I had many conversations about that in Connecticut.
Mhm.
I want to open up for questions because we have about 6 minutes for questions before we do another small group exercise. But if there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand. We don't have a mic circling around, so just use your teacher voice to elevate. Yes, and please introduce yourself.
Hey, Casey with Pearl. This question's for Colby. Yeah. I'm curious as things transition from 45 to, was it 14, 16? I'm assuming there was an abatement of the amount of money that was appropriated under 45. How did you think about refining? How do you think legislators thought about refining those bills, and how did you form that language from the transition from 45 to 14, 16 to ensure that you could double down on what's working and try to get better efficiencies with the lack of funding for bill to bill?
Yeah, originally 45, the language was if you're receiving ESSER, American Rescue Plan funds, you're required to apply for this. And it continued the similar language with that. It wasn't necessarily providing additional funding source, but it did reduce it down to 2 subjects. 45 required every subject tested. So some grade levels are testing 4 subjects. My daughter this year is 8th grade. She tested 4 subjects: social studies, science, math, and reading. Kids were accumulating 4 subjects that they were required to receive 30 hours in each subject. It was too much. So we took feedback because we visited regional service centers, feedback from parents calling in, school districts, and we distilled it down and extracted that out. So right now you're required only to provide tutoring for 2 subjects, prioritizing math and reading. So it's math and social studies. You would do math and social studies, reading, and so on. So we tried to distill the language down so it is manageable to the point made earlier. You want them to do something and not be overwhelmed and do nothing. Keeping that there. There was not an option for parents to opt out. That was a big problem. There are cases where parents wanted to opt out, and that was not in the legislation in any way. Texas is a big state on parents having control over their children's education, and that was not afforded in the first bill. That was added there as well. We also expanded. We were 3-to-1 in the first 45. We expanded that to 4-to-1 ratio to allow some flexibility with that. So those were some of the changes based on feedback, but we grounded that in research. We also found, not the waiver, but the 4-to-1 ratio was stuff that we had found in research as well to support that. I don't know if that answered.
No, I did. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. So hi, everyone. I'm Judy from Think Academy, and actually this evening we also have like a demo, so feel free to join us. And actually I have a question for Shaunté. So I just wondering, because you mentioned before, like you have like the things for over 20 years. So I just wondered, do you have anything to share about the breakthroughs or the achievement you have after the pandemic, like after all of the virtual things, and then we come back to the in-person, anything different?
Sure. Yes. So just to clarify, the center has been around for over 20 years, but we just started providing tutoring supports now, like in February of 2025. But in terms of lessons that we've learned, because a lot of the programming that we provide is asynchronous professional learning, we already had a good model for how to provide instruction to adults. using, best practices in a virtual environment. And so we were able to apply that when we created the courses for the Florida Tutoring Advantage specifically.
So my mother was fond of telling me that I was born with a microphone in my mouth, so I don't know if I need it. Jason Singer from Ignite Reading, and I'm just wondering, each of you have your own state context, and what is it that you want vendors to know is most important to you, and where you've seen the most success in your particular context?
I would love to jump in first on this because this is such an important topic for me. As I mentioned, we have currently, well, concluded now because of the late liquidation change, but I've been working with 6 vendors through the state-funded vendor program, and we have monthly meetings, and I have lots of questions and great conversations and great relationships with these vendors. I think that the tension that vendors have that I would acknowledge is that they have a contract with a school district. The school district is paying them. You're running a business. You know what high impact tutoring is and how this tutoring should happen. But then the district says to you, and I want 8 kids in a group, and I can only have them meet with you one time, and then you're kind of left in a lurch. So I think the challenge is, how can the state help communicate to districts and schools so that vendors can implement high impact tutoring as it's designed to be? And then the second piece I would say is my question about instructional materials when provided by vendors. And how does a vendor ensure that tutors are communicating with teachers? How do you negotiate that with the school district and make sure that's in place so that the instruction is aligned to grade level content and not remedial in nature? So those would be my 2 biggies.
I actually am going to take a point of privilege and answer that question as well, if that's okay. I would say 2 pieces of advice: quality over quantity. I'd much rather you and other tutoring providers be providing our schools with well-trained tutors, even if it means it's fewer at first. And then the flip side of that coin is, please don't overpromise and under-deliver, right? In a bid to win a contract with the district. We saw that a lot in Connecticut, where big promises were made. Districts were falling in love, and then ultimately it didn't come through.
We're in a little bit of a different situation because we contract directly with the vendors and not through the districts. And so for me, it would be that shared accountability, because at the end of the day, I want to be sure that kids are learning. And so whether that's us negotiating a conversation with the district because they have a different understanding of what's actually happening. And so just knowing that there has to be shared accountability where there's something in it for the district, for us as well as the university, because of course we're contracting and using OBC as a model, but clearly there's an opportunity for the vendor to have some opportunity to weigh into that equation as well.
Let's take one more question, if that's okay, David.
Thanks, everyone. This is, I think, more of a question for Shaunté and then maybe Christina as well. I am curious what, Shaunté, you guys just are designing this program in Florida and starting to implement it. And I think it sounds like you chose to lean into working with vendors rather than directing funding toward to districts, or maybe you're doing some of both. And I'm curious about why you decided to favor one strategy over another. And if you are going with the vendor approach, you're thinking on why to use the number of vendors that you went with, how you selected them. I'm just curious about that. Because Christina, you spoke about kind of moving more towards the district's focused strategy, and would love to hear your thinking on why you're moving in that direction.
Sure. Yep. So because we started so swiftly, we didn't have an opportunity to really provide the robust supports that I think districts need to implement their own programming. And so for that reason, that isn't a model that we're using for this pilot. However, we're planning for us to provide funding and support via resources, the professional learning that I mentioned, to districts for the implementation for the next school year. And so that's very much something that we want to do both of. In terms of how we selected our vendors, we went through a pretty rigorous process through the university to vet a number of vendors. And we wanted to have more people on the bench because, again, we're looking at this from a research perspective. And so just because they made things sound good and look good and they were flashy and had all the things that people wanted to see, at the end of the day, again, I'm looking at outcomes for students. And so if a vendor isn't doing the thing that's best for students, then we're not obligated to work with them. And that's it.
Yeah, and so in New Mexico, we are doing a combination, and it seems as though there's a lot of reasons why it might be better. The closer in-house, as far as cost, as far as teachers and educators in the school communities really owning their ability to create those programs, and that just naturally makes things possible to maybe be a little bit more consistent and coherent across the entire school day. But like there are cases where it's really more possible to make a program happen if there's a vendor involved. So we're really allowing for both. And providing support for both, and we really actually interested in getting started to create a vetted vendor list. We do not have one right now. We have a process for high quality instructional materials. We do not have yet a process for vendors that provide tutoring. I want to create that.
The GenAI leadership meeting is not happening today. Sorry about that.
So since we're short on time, actually, if there's any other questions, these are great. I think we can entertain one or two more. Yes.
It's Brian Hassel from Public Impact, and I'm thinking about what I've heard a theme throughout this couple days is there's a future where tutoring is really woven into the fabric of schools. It's the way schools do their business, or a big part of it. It's not an add-on program, and I think that's a great vision. I think that's going to take a lot of redesign work at the school level, roles, staffing models, pay, how money flows, schedules, several of you have mentioned. And I just wondered if any of you have considered pairing your funding for tutoring with funding for redesign, so that on the other side of your grant, schools are in a really different place. And if your grant goes away, they can keep without your funding.
I know that would certainly be helpful in some cases, because we really want to see districts and schools being able to integrate tutoring into the school day. And then there's a lot of questions that come up, like, how do we do that? I mean, are we pulling kids out of something else that's important, right? We don't want to do that. And we've had some districts that have figured it out, that they've really figured it out. They have a whole block period where they do all their tutoring. And other districts are like, I have no idea. Let's just do it after school. So I think that it would be helpful. I think it would be very helpful to have that as a resource and as an option to support schools in figuring out how to do that.
And I'll say that we haven't done it yet, but a lot of what we're planning on doing is supporting districts via technical assistance. So that's a part of it, right? So how do we help you to make this a part of and the fabric of the school day, such that if they wanted to hire tutors themselves, if they wanted to, whatever the thing is, then we can provide those supports for the district.
Well, I know we have about 3 minutes left, and we have an exciting panel on AI next, Hyper Hope. So the AI panel is still happening, despite an AI leadership meeting not. But I wanted to thank the four of you. At the top of the meeting, we talked about the many hats that you all wear, and I heard it in your answers today. We have a legislative advocate and a TA provider in Texas. We have research and evaluation and district thought partnership in Florida. We have accountability and curriculum support in Ohio, and in New Mexico, we have, frankly, it sounds like all of the above, right? And so wanted to thank you all for the work that you're doing in keeping this work moving forward, even in the absence of continued federal funding. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.
Thank you.
Right?
Yep, Main Hall, we have a 15-minute break, and then please join us in the main room for the AI.